My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old. And for as long as I can remember, I've been the forgotten daughter in my own family. That summer evening, at our traditional 4th of July backyard cookout in Dallas, Texas, my mother raised her wine glass, locked eyes with me, and with a cold smirk said, "If you vanished tomorrow, nobody would even care." The sting of her words sliced through the laughter that followed. My brother, the golden child, chuckled. My sister rolled her eyes as if agreeing. Even my father didn't defend me. But instead of breaking down, I forced a smile, lifted my soda can and whispered back, "We'll see." They thought I was joking. I wasn't. Years of being ignored, belittled, and overshadowed had been simmering inside me. And in that one humiliating moment, the anger hardened into something unshakable. That night, I made a decision that would not only change my life forever, but would also unravel the carefully polished image of my perfect family. What none of them knew was that I had the strength and the secret to prove my mother dead wrong. So, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. What happened next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and revenge. And before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe because this is only the beginning. I grew up in a brick two-story in Plano, Texas, where the sprinklers hissed at dawn and our cul-de-sac smelled like fresh mulch every Saturday. Our house looked like every other on the block, but inside, there was an order to things. My mother liked her lilies arranged exactly 6 to a vase. My father liked the thermostat at 69, and the family attention flowed, like a river with carved banks, to everyone but me. My father, Thomas Carter, owned an HVAC company he'd built from a single truck to a fleet. He left before sunrise in a navy polo that smelled faintly of Freon, and came home long after dark with numbers in his head. When he talked, it was about margins, call volume, and closing Q3. He loved to tell the story of how he bootstrapped the business. It always ended with him clapping my brother on the shoulder and saying, "One day this'll be yours, Mason." I was there for that story, always and never in it. My mother, Linda, lived at the country club the way fish live in water. Tuesdays were for tennis, Thursdays for committee luncheons, Saturdays for charity galas with centerpieces tall enough to block conversation. She had a talent for compliments that stuck like burrs. "That color is brave on you, Em," she'd say, patting my arm before a school concert. Or, "Your little camera thing keeps you busy, doesn't it?" Her smile never quite touched her eyes. Then there were my siblings, the constellation my parents navigated by. Mason, 2 years older, had a quarterback's grin and a resume that read like a brag list. District titles, state finals, a football scholarship to Oklahoma State. When he blew his knee sophomore year and pivoted to sports management, my father converted disappointment into pride faster than anyone I've ever seen. "That's leadership," Dad bragged, turning setbacks into strategy. My younger sister broke war ambition like perfume. Harvard Law posters taped to her bedroom wall at 14, debate trophies lined up like a miniature army on her bookshelf. When she was a junior, she won a statewide mock trial competition. My mother mailed announcement cards with embossed gold borders. I know, because I addressed half of them. Here's the thing about being the middle child in a family that prefers headlines. You learn to recognize the quiet spaces where no one's looking. I found mine behind the lens of an old Canon AE. One that Grandma June gave me when I was 11. The leather strap was cracked and the light meter stuck sometimes, but when I lifted it to my face, I felt the world sharpen. It wasn't just about beauty, it was about catching something true before it slipped away. I took pictures of window reflections after summer storms, of sunburned hands shelling peas, of tire swings at dusk. Grandma June taped my photos to her fridge with magnets shaped like tiny chili peppers and told me, "You don't blink at the world, baby, you look." At home, the fridge carried other things. Mason's clippings, Brooks ribbons, my report cards if they were straight A's, and my mother needed to fill a space. On the rare occasions a photo of mine made it up there, a blue heron rising out of White Rock Lake, a fierce portrait of our neighbor Miss Eleanor with her oxygen tank, it would quietly disappear the next week. "We need space for Brooks' scholarship letter," Mom would say, sliding the magnet away like she was shifting a cloud of dust. The pattern had roots that wrapped around my childhood. There was my 9th birthday, which landed on the same day, as Mason's first playoff game. The party was postponed to the next weekend and never rescheduled. 2 months later, my mother handed me a wrapped jewelry box in the car after church. Inside was a bracelet with a missing charm and a sticky note reading for M in her cursive. I recognized the bracelet. It used to be Brooke's. She'd lost the Texas charm after a pool party. "It's vintage," Mom said, as if I'd explained the tarnish. I said thank you like a good girl, and watched the sunlight turn the silver a soft, tired gray. In middle school, I got the lead in the spring musical not because I could sing, but because nobody else wanted to memorize that many lines. I hung the cast schedule on the corkboard in the kitchen weeks ahead. When opening night came, the auditorium lights were so bright I couldn't see past the first row, but I could feel the empty spots where my family should have been. After the show, my choir teacher, Mrs. Lane, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You were a surprise, Emily." At home later, I found a post-it on the counter. "Proud of you. Reheat casserole at 350 degrees. The oven was cold. By high school, invisibility had a rhythm. Brooke got a car the week she turned 16. A silver CRV with a bow on it that matched her nail polish. When my birthday came around, I got keys too. To Mason's dented Ford Ranger. Temporarily, because he was leaving for college in August. Be practical, Dad said, tossing me the key ring while he read the paper. The Ranger smelled like stale fries and gym socks. The ceiling liner sagged like a tired eyelid. I decided to make peace with it. I kept a roll of black tape in the glove compartment to hold the radio faceplate in place, and I learned where the heater stuck halfway to hot. Senior year, I submitted a portfolio to the Dallas County Youth Arts Showcase. I shot the early morning shift at the donut shop on Legacy Drive. The way the baker sugar his hands midair as if blessing the dough. I shot a homeless veteran's boots with 3 broken eyelets and a perfect stitch repair. I shot a portrait of Grandma June in her backyard. The lines around her eyes deep as riverbeds. I was too afraid to tell anyone until the envelope came. First place, the letter said, along with a scholarship to a summer photography institute in Santa Fe. I made spaghetti for dinner to share the news. When I opened my mouth, Brooke waved her phone. "Mom, Georgetown wants to schedule an interview," she announced. The conversation folded around her like a tent. I kept stirring the sauce until it turned gluey and said nothing. Later, Dad microwaved a plate at 10:45 p.m., took one bite, and told me I should have added more basil. I wish I could say my parents were monsters. They weren't. They were human in the most maddening way. Distracted, proud when it was easy, impatient when it wasn't, generous to the world, and stingy with me in the little places that counted. They saved for college, taught us to return shopping carts, delivered meals to the church pantry at Thanksgiving. They also missed my dentist appointment and blamed me for not reminding them, forgot to sign my field trip forms until the morning of, and once sent me to school on picture day in a shirt with a bleached spot because the jacket covers it. My mother brought casseroles to grieving neighbors and rolled her eyes when I cried over a dead bluebird I found on the patio. It's nature, Emily. Grandma June was the exception, the one person who could see around corners. She came to every small thing I invited her to. The last-minute gallery opening at the community center, the Sunday, where I sang harmony in church, even the camera store demo on Saturday mornings, where a retired photojournalist named Clay showed us how to meter light off a gray card. She'd slip me a folded 20 and say, "For film," like she was passing state secrets. On her coffee table sat a stack of National Geographics, a jar of peppermints, and a photo I took of her hands. When I worried out loud about the future, she said, "You weren't built for applause, baby. You were built for truth. Truth makes its own noise." In our house, noise had rules. The sound that mattered was the roar of the stadium when Mason walked onto the field, the polite applause of banquet halls when Brooke accepted another plaque, the crisp pop of a champagne cork at the club when Dad hit a sales milestone. My noise, shutter clicks, darkroom timers, the quiet gasp when a print bloomed to life in Developer, didn't register. Once after dinner, I asked my father if he'd sit for a portrait. "I want to practice with low light," I said. He didn't look up from the email on his phone. "Ask me Saturday." Saturday came and went. On Sunday, he shaved his beard and complained that my camera made him look tired. There were moments when being unseen felt like safety. When Brooke and Mom warred over dress codes and curfews, I slipped past with the Ranger keys and a backpack, headed for White Rock Lake at sunset. I'd park near the boathouse and sit on the hood with my camera, waiting for the water to catch fire. Nobody called to ask where I was. Once, a storm rolled in fast, and I drove home with the wipers on high, thunder punching the sky. I came into the kitchen dripping. Mom glanced at me, then at the puddle at my feet. "Towels are in the laundry room," she said, and returned to chopping chives. Brooke's senior year brought a new ritual, college tours. We flew to Boston for 3 days of brick buildings and beaming tour guides. The last night we ate clam chowder under a framed rowing or while my mother said, "Your sister is going to change the world, Em." I sipped water and told myself that maybe I would too, just in a quieter language. When we flew back, the suitcase with the Harvard sweatshirt was for Brooke. Mine was the carry-on with the camera wrapped in sweaters, as if the TSA could confiscate the only thing that made sense to me. It wasn't all cold shoulders. There were nights our family piled into the living room with Whataburger and Netflix, and Dad fell asleep in his recliner with one shoe off. There were mornings when Mom hummed Moon River while buttering toast, and for a second I could see the girl she used to be before the club and the committees. Once, when the Ranger finally died at Coit and Spring Creek, Mason drove across town to jump it and made me laugh until my stomach hurt. He was kind in glimpses, a Sonic slush on a hot day, a note under my door that said good luck today the morning of my AP English exam. But kindness in glimpses is like sunlight in winter. It warms the spot it hits and leaves the rest of you shivering. The summer after Brooke left for Georgetown and Mason settled into his grad program in Stillwater, the house got very quiet. I was 20, commuting to community college, working weekends at a camera store off Preston Road, and shooting seniors' portraits for cash. My mother started setting 2 plates at dinner, one for her, one for Dad. Without asking if I'd join. "You're out a lot," she said, like it was an accusation and not the physics of being least chosen. I kept my schedule taped inside my closet door. Class times, work shifts, and a neat column titled Shoots. The dates circled in red. If you asked any of them then about me, they'd have said I was fine. Emily's low maintenance. My mother told a neighbor once over a wedge salad. "She's our steady one." Steady is what you call a person you don't intend to notice, unless they fall. Every family has a sentence they mistake for truth. Ours was this: "We're proud of all our kids equally." It sounded so right that nobody checked it for cracks. But cracks were everywhere. In the missed games and the quietly reheated dinners, in the awards mailed and the photos unhung, in the bracelets with missing charms and the cars that were always someone else's first. I didn't need a magnifying glass to see them. I needed a camera, and I needed the nerve to point it in the right direction. I didn't realize then how fragile the story we told ourselves was, how one hard moment could make it collapse. I also didn't know that the person who had always seen me best, Grandma June, was keeping a secret of her own, tucked inside a fireproof box under her bed, a secret with my name on it. That would come later. For now, I learned to live in the negative space, to make pictures out of the places where I wasn't expected to exist. That was the shape of my life before everything snapped. Not with a scream, but with a smile in a backyard where the grill smoked and the flag hung perfectly centered over the patio. Before that night, you could have argued that I was oversensitive, that I read too much into offhand comments and family habits. After that night, there'd be no arguing left to do. I would finally take my place in the frame, not because they invited me into it, but because I stepped there on my own. After years of being sidelined, I decided if I couldn't earn my family's attention, I would earn the world's. I threw myself into my photography with a hunger that bordered on obsession. My friends at community college spent weekends partying at Lake Texoma, but I spent mine crouched in alleyways, chasing shafts of light like they were oxygen. I saved every tip from the camera store and every paycheck from part-time gigs, funneling into gear, film, editing software, and bus tickets to places I thought would widen my lens on life. While Mason coasted on family introductions to land an internship with the Dallas Cowboys front office, I was hustling to book senior portraits in backyards where the grass came up patchy and the swing sets leaned to one side. I learned how to fix red eye without Photoshop, how to coax a smile out of a kid who hated cameras, how to frame a high school senior's crooked cap so it looked regal. Parents paid me half of what studios charged, but to me, it was a kingdom. Each cash envelope, even if it was only $80, felt like proof I wasn't invisible everywhere. I sacrificed nights of sleep stitching together online classes in digital editing with my daytime coursework. My laptop was a hand-me-down from Mason, keys shiny from his sports reports, these sticking so I had to slam it. When it overheated, I set it on a bag of frozen peas and kept editing. My room became a makeshift studio. Sheets pinned over windows for diffused light, books stacked to balance my tripod. I couldn't afford fancy backdrops, so I experimented with shadows and textures. Cardboard painted black, aluminum foil for sparkle. It wasn't glamorous, but I learned to create something from almost nothing. Meanwhile, Brooke's path was paved with marble. Her internship at a Boston law firm came with a stipend bigger than my entire yearly income. My mother sent care packages of designer blazers and monogram stationery. When I asked if she could help me buy a refurbished lens I needed for a wedding shoot, she said, "Sweetie, you should be saving, not spending on hobbies." I didn't argue. I mowed lawns in the neighborhood and sold prints at a flea market until I could afford it. The day I unwrapped that lens, I felt like I bought a piece of my own future. The real sacrifices were quieter. Missing birthdays of the few friends I had left because I couldn't spare the gas money. Eating cereal for dinner so I could cover the cost of printing large format photos for a contest. Saying no when classmates invited me to spring break in Galveston because I was terrified of falling behind. There were nights I sat on my bed, surrounded by prints that nobody in my family would ever look at, and wondered if I was just fooling myself. But then I'd remember the way Grandma June studied my photos with her brow furrowed like she was praying over them, and I'd keep going. I worked odd jobs too, babysitting, dog walking, even handing out flyers for a roofing company in 95-degree heat. My skin burned, my feet blistered, but I kept telling myself, this is the toll for building something of your own. Every dollar scraped together kept my dream alive just a little longer. There were moments of small triumphs. Winning second place in a regional photo contest, getting a feature in a niche travel blog, selling my first frame piece to a stranger at an art fair. But when I brought these victories home, they evaporated. The night I excitedly told my parents about the contest award, Mason strolled in with tickets to a Mavericks game. Within minutes, my ribbon was forgotten on the counter while the family huddled around him, planning the trip. That was the rhythm of my early 20s. Giving more than I had, pushing past exhaustion, watching my siblings get praised for climbing stairs someone else had built for them, while I clawed at walls no one even believed existed. I didn't just sacrifice comfort, I sacrificed the belief that my family would ever see me for who I really was. And yet, every shutter click was a promise. Someday the picture would change. The 4th of July barbecue had always been the Carter centerpiece event. Neighbors came with pies. My father lit sparklers for the kids, and my mother floated through the backyard like a hostess on parade. That year, the year everything cracked, the party was bigger than ever. Mason had just been promoted in his sports management firm, and Brooke was clerking for a federal judge in D.C. The guest list felt like a press release. Colleagues, clients, even the pastor from church. I arrived carrying my camera bag, though I had no intention of taking photos. I told myself it was habit, but maybe I wanted the weight on my shoulder, a reminder of the life I was building without them. My mother's backyard was immaculate. White tents, red, white, and blue bunting, a live jazz trio tucked under the pergola. The air smelled of ribs and roses. I drifted near the drink table, watching Mason's fiancée laugh with Brooke as though she'd already been grafted into the golden circle. Dad stood at the grill, flipping steaks with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other. Nobody asked about my work, my clients, or the upcoming small exhibition a cafe owner in Dallas had offered me. I wasn't surprised. The moment came like a flick of a match. My mother, manicured nails wrapped around her wine glass, turned toward me. Her smile curved sharp. "Emily," she said, her voice loud enough to hush the jazz. "If you vanished tomorrow, do you think anyone would even notice?" The laughter that followed was cruel in its ease. Mason chuckled, Brooke smirked. Dad gave a low grunt that could have been agreement. Even some of the neighbors tittered, assuming it was harmless banter. But I felt the words like a knife pressed to the ribs. I didn't flinch. I raised my soda can, smiled faintly, and said, "We'll see." Silence rippled for a moment before the laughter resumed, louder this time, as if to bury what had just happened. But inside me, something final clicked into place. I stayed through the fireworks, each burst of red and gold reflected in my untouched plate. Nobody noticed I hadn't eaten. Nobody noticed I'd stopped speaking. They were complete without me. A perfect portrait frame to exclude the subject standing just outside the lens. The drive home blurred. I gripped the wheel, my mother's words echoing with each passing streetlight. At my apartment, I couldn't sit still. I paced from the window to the kitchen to the bedroom. The air felt too heavy, the walls too close. By midnight, I was on the phone with my best friend, Veronica. We'd met in college. She'd been the only one to really see my work for what it was. "Ronnie," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to disappear." There was a pause, then a tired sigh. "Because of tonight? Because of everything?" I whispered. "All of it." She tried to talk me out of it at first, suggested therapy, confrontation, even a long vacation. But as I laid out the years of slights and erasures, her voice softened. By dawn, we had a plan. I'd pack only what mattered, camera gear, a quilt Grandma June had sewn my external drives. I'd withdraw cash, leave a note, abandon my phone. Veronica would be my tether, the only one who knew where I was. The next morning, while the neighborhood still crackled with leftover fireworks, I slipped out. A suitcase rolled behind me, the air thick with July heat. I left my phone on the counter beside a note that read, "I need space. I'm safe. Don't look for me." I tucked Grandma's photograph into my bag and locked the door without looking back. At the Greyhound station, I paid cash for a ticket to Portland, Oregon. I remembered its rain, its art scene, its anonymity. 2 days of bus transfers later, I stepped into a city where no one knew I was the invisible Carter child. What I didn't know was that my disappearance would rip through my family like a fault line, and that buried in their polished image was a secret tied directly to me. A secret Grandma June had been keeping, one that would shatter the hierarchy they'd built and drag every hidden fracture to the surface. In Portland, the rain became my cocoon. I rented a cramped studio above a used bookstore, the kind of place where the ceiling creaked with every step and the smell of old paper drifted up through the vents. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by silence that belonged to me. But with silence came the weight of everything I'd left behind. At night, I replayed the barbecue in my head. The clink of my mother's glass. The laughter. My father's nonchalance. Each sound pressed against me like bricks stacking into a wall. I told myself I was free, but the truth was, I was haunted. Freedom wasn't a clean break. It was a slow unraveling of the belief that maybe, someday, they would notice me. Loneliness carved itself deep. I walked the streets with my camera, capturing reflections in puddles, graffiti peeling from alley walls, the faces of strangers who didn't know my name. Through the lens, I could breathe. But when I put the camera down, the apartment closed in again. Meals became instant noodles, eaten cross-legged on the floor. Nights ended with me staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to muffle the ache. Veronica checked in weekly, her voice the only tether to my old life. "They filed a missing persons report," she said once. "But it didn't stick. The police told your mom you left voluntarily." "Figures," I muttered. What gutted me wasn't that the police didn't care. It was that my family hadn't fought harder to prove them wrong. The one light was Grandma June. According to Veronica, she called every week, desperate for scraps of information. "Tell her I'm safe," I begged. "Please." But even those reassurances didn't silence the guilt that gnawed at me. She had been my only true champion, and I had vanished from her too. On my loneliest nights, I found myself whispering apologies into the darkness. For missing Mason's engagement party, for not being there when Brooke won another accolade, for abandoning Grandma June. It didn't matter that they'd erased me long before I erased myself. The ache was still there. There were moments of collapse, crying on the bathroom floor because I couldn't afford rent and groceries in the same week, shaking so badly I could barely thread film onto reels in the darkroom. Once, I almost dialed my mother just to hear her voice, but my eyes landed on the note I'd left behind. I need space. I'm safe. Don't look for me. Calling would have been betrayal, not to them but to myself. And yet, the more I hurt, the clearer something became. Disappearing wasn't cowardice. It was survival. For the first time, I was forced to sit with myself, stripped of comparison and criticism. Pain was the teacher I never asked for, but it was showing me what I was made of. The breaking point came one stormy night. Rain hammered the windows. Wind rattled the glass. I stared at the photograph of Grandma June's hands, wrinkled, strong, steady, and felt a wave of despair crash over me. Am I really nothing without them? I whispered. My voice cracked in the empty room, but the answer didn't come from the walls. It came from inside, quiet but firm. No, you are not nothing. You are becoming. That night, soaked in tears and rain, I realized the worst had already happened. I had been invisible to the people who should have seen me most. And yet here I was, alive, breathing, still creating. The humiliation of that barbecue, the loneliness of my exile. It was agony, yes. But it was also proof. Proof that I could endure. Proof that my story wasn't over. By the time autumn painted Portland in gold, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. My photography started catching attention on local blogs, then in small galleries. Strangers paid for prints that my own family wouldn't glance at twice. Each sale felt like a quiet rebellion, a whispered "see me now." But the real twist didn't come from Portland. It came from Texas. One rainy evening, Veronica called, her voice tight. "Emily, you need to hear this. Your grandmother June passed away last week." The world tilted. My anchor, the one person who had truly seen me, was gone. I sat on the floor of my studio, clutching the photo of her hands, sobbing until my throat burned. But grief turned into shock when Veronica told me the rest. "She left a letter for you. And, Emily, she left you everything." Grandma June's modest estate wasn't millions, but it was significant. Her house, her savings, and most importantly, a lockbox filled with journals and letters. Inside those pages, she had documented decades of family history. Favoritism, cruelty, the moments my parents had dismissed me, the times they had tried to pressure her into leaving her will to Mason and Brooke instead. She'd written it all down, and in her final letter to me, she was clear. "You are my legacy. Use this to finally stand tall." When the will was read in Dallas, my parents and siblings were blindsided. Mason expected the house. Brooke expected the accounts. My mother expected control. Instead, it was me, the invisible child, who held the keys. The confrontation was brutal. My mother called it betrayal. My father accused me of manipulating Grandma. Mason shouted about fairness. Brooke threatened legal action. But I sat there, steady, with Grandma's words echoing in my mind. "You were built for truth. Truth makes its own noise." And then came the second twist. In one of the journals, June had revealed something buried. When I was a baby, my father had nearly abandoned us. He'd wanted to move across the country for business, leaving my mother to raise 3 children alone. It was Grandma who intervened, who convinced him to stay, who even lent him the money that started his HVAC company. Without her, there would have been no Carter empire. My siblings' golden opportunities existed because she had saved the family, and she had chosen me as her torchbearer, the one who never got credit, but who carried resilience in silence. I didn't lash out or scream. My revenge was quieter and sharper. I refused to sell the house, instead turning it into a community art center in Grandma's name. I poured her savings into scholarships for young photographers who, like me, felt unseen. Every announcement made the local papers, attaching my name to something bigger than Mason's contracts or Brooke's cases. For the first time, my family had to watch from the sidelines while I became the headline. They came to me, hats in hand, asking to be included in events, desperate to stand in the glow. Sometimes I let them. Sometimes I didn't. That was my power. The Carter family's polished portrait had shattered, but I had built a new frame, One where I wasn't just visible. I was the center. Looking back now, I realize my mother's cruel words at that barbecue. If you vanished tomorrow, no one would even care. Were both a curse and a challenge. She was wrong, of course. I vanished, and the world noticed. My grandmother noticed enough to leave me her legacy. The community noticed when my art began speaking for those who had no voice. And even my own family noticed, though far too late, when they saw the empty space I had once quietly filled. I didn't win by screaming louder or by begging to be seen. I won by stepping away, by writing my own story, and by building something so undeniable that they couldn't look through me anymore. So I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have disappeared to prove them wrong? Or stayed and fought to be seen? Tell me in the comments. I want to know. And if my story struck a chord with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who's ever felt invisible. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living a life so bold and true that the people who once ignored you